Hello, everyone. I really wanted to do a video of waiting for Godot for a very long time. It was long overdue, and many people were asking me to make videos on waiting for Godot. So here we are. This video is going to be the first of the series. However, you will have to understand that there should be an introduction to waiting for Godot. Okay. I will give that introductory video later. All right. So today, without further ado, we will dabble into the depths of the play. Okay. So the first thing that I want to deal with over here is what happens in Waiting for Godot. Now, if I may very briefly tell you the summary, you see, in Waiting for Godot, at its core, the text grapples with the existential dilemma of human existence. Now, with my very first sentence, what happens is that many people will think that, sir, this is a theater of the absurd, and why are you bringing in existentialism over here? I'll clarify all the issues, I'll clarify. First, let me show you what happens in the play. Okay. Two people have gathered underneath a tree by a road on a low mound, and they are waiting for someone. Now, these two people are men, they are of indeterminate age, and they are waiting for a certain person called Godot. Okay. Now, it appears from their conversations that they know each other. They refer to each other as Vladimir and Estragon. But later they refer to each other as Didi, Gogo, and many, many, many other names. Okay. Now, they are waiting for a certain Mr. Godot. But as we get to know as the play progresses, we get to know that they have been waiting for Mr. Godot earlier as well. They are waiting today and they shall wait later as well. Now, the play is constructed in two acts. Beckett calls it a tragicomedy in two acts. But what happens is that the two acts are identical. These two men keep on waiting for a certain Mr. Godot, and Mr. Godot never comes. Okay. Now, what they do is they try to spend their time in between. That is, they are trying to make their wait worthwhile by engaging in a thousand things. Sometimes they talk about their hats and their boots. Sometimes they talk about the prospect of salvation and damnation. Sometimes they contemplate life itself. Sometimes they contemplate suicide itself. It is all a giant tapestry. It's almost like a game to these two men. And they're waiting for Godot, but Godot does not come. Two people appear instead of Godot. One is a landowner called Pozzo, and the other is his servant Lucky. And Pozzo and Lucky, unlike these two friends, let us call them friends for the sake of the argument. We shall come to this later as well. Why am I calling them friends? Why not just acquaintances? We will see that Pozzo and Lucky share a master slave relationship where Pozzo ties Lucky with a rope and Lucky behaves like a dog. And you will see that in the entire scope of the play, things get a little problematic. Okay. Now, in the first act, Pozzo appears and Pozzo says that I am not Godot. Sorry. In the second and towards the end of the first act, we see that a certain boy appears, a little boy, and he announces that Mr. Godot is not coming today, he is coming the next day, he shall come tomorrow. The second act begins almost in the same manner, apart from a very few changes. That is, in the second act, we see that uh, The tree which was there in the first act, which was bare to its bones, now has a few leaves. And on the other hand, we see that Vladimir and Estragon are still waiting for Mr. Godot. Pozzo and Lucky still come. Now they are blind and dumb, respectively. And finally, another boy appears, and the boy states that Mr. Godot is not coming today. He is coming the next day. And Vladimir and Estragon, they discuss that let's go. And the final stage direction says they do not move. Now, look, if I talk about a play in this way, you have read your Bernard Shaw, you have read your Shakespeare, you have read many, many other plays. But there, if I told you the basic storyline, basic plot line, what happened was that you could make some sense out of it. That is, okay, this is the story. But here, the story in itself does not create a sense. And the play itself is much, much deeper and laden with greater significance than this very meager sort of uh, summary would go on to propagate. Now, what do we learn from here? We shall talk about all of that. So, we will come to that. Let's come to that first. So, you see, Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, in a way, talks about several existential themes, absurdity, and the general human condition. Now, it is set against a barren landscape featuring sparse dialogue. It follows two characters, Vladimir and Estragon, as they endlessly wait for the arrival of the mysterious figure named Godot. And seemingly meaningless conversations are engaged in, which are punctuated by moments of humor, despair, philosophical reflection. Both and Lucky appear, but Godot does not appear. This would be a very brief summary of Waiting for Godot. But why is the play so very important? Let's look at it in this angle. Now, look, the play is important because of that first sentence that I said at the beginning of this discussion. That is, Waiting for Godot is renowned for the exploration of existential themes of absurdity and the human condition. And if we try to separate and isolate the component parts of the play, we will get a better idea. What do I mean by this? That we will get a better idea? Look, first, let me talk about the uh, title. Okay, if I talk about the title, you will get some idea about why I am speaking in this way. Now, the title "Waiting for Godot" is adorned with a subtitle, a tragicomedy in two acts. Now, this title plays a crucial role in shaping the reader's understanding of the uh, play's central themes, the premise, the characters, the mood, the tone, the setting, and everything. Now, let me slowly go on into it. Now, look, when Beckett originally wrote the play in 1953, directed by Roger Blanc in Théâtre de Babylon, there the original play was titled as En attendant Godot, that is, While Waiting for Godot. But in the English translation, in the English version made by Beckett himself, he dropped that while. And in the course of the next few lectures, I will argue how this was significant. Now, look, the title, Waiting for Godot, encapsulates in its core the central premise of the play. That is, two characters, Vladimir and Estragon. They are endlessly waiting for the arrival of the mysterious figure called Godot. Now look at the first word, waiting. So the act of waiting serves as a metaphor throughout the play. And you will see that if you locate the play in its cultural, temporal, spatial context, you will see that waiting was a major and is a major metaphor for the entire human condition. The human animal is marked by a sense of a necessity of waiting. It highlights the character's existential angst and the absurdity of their existence in itself. Therefore, you see, who they are waiting for is not important. If you have read T.S. Eliot's poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, there Prufrock talks about some overwhelming question to lead you to an overwhelming question. But then he quickly says something followed by that. He says, "Oh, do not ask what is it. Let us go on and make our visit." Why does he not ask what is it? If life leads you to an overwhelming question, why don't you ask what is it? Because, my dear friends, the question might be different for you, the question might be different for me, the question might be different for X, might be different for Y, might be different for Z. One second, excuse me. That is, for somebody, the question might be an existential one. For someone else, the question might be about money. All right. For somebody else, the question might be about something philosophical, something uh, quintessential, etc., etc., etc. Okay, one second. এটা আপনি রাখুন, আপনার যা হয়েছে ওটা থেকে নিয়ে নেবেন।
কার্বনটা পাঠালেন তো
না না, যা হয়েছে ওটাকে কেটে দেবেন। So, the for someone the question might be philosophical, for someone else it might be existential, for someone else it might be monetary, for someone else it might be love related, for someone else it might be for pining for someone. There can be 1,000 questions. All of them are valid, equally valid. So, in a way, Godot, in the present context, represents that unattainable or that unachieved yet. Godot is perhaps that god who has gone so far away that he has become a dot. Just like a star in the night sky is so far away that it looks like a dot. Right? It looks like a dot of light. But is that star so small? No. It's huge. We cannot even conceive how huge the star is with our human capacity. So when God, by God I mean whatever you are seeking, you don't have to be religious to understand this God. By God, I mean what you are desiring, what you are pining for. Say somebody who's pining for, say, $1 billion. He also has his own God. She also has her own God. And somebody who is looking for actual God is also pining for God, whatever. So when God becomes a dot, in a way, my friends, he becomes Guru. Okay. Now, as I was saying, so Godot is that unattained, that Godot represents that uh, elusive, enigmatic figure whose significance remains ambiguous throughout the play. And the title, therefore, my friends, evokes a sense of anticipation and expectation while also conveying a sense of futility and meaninglessness. Because if Godot is that unattainable, it is very, very real as a possibility that Godot will never appear. But simultaneously, we are waiting for Godot. But we must keep in mind that Godot might never appear. Therefore, the ambiguity of the title invites multiple interpretations. And this keeps the play open ended in nature, and the themes and symbolisms of the play support this angle of argument. The Godot has been interpreted as a symbol of hope, of salvation, of redemption, as well as a metaphor for the futility of human existence. As I said, when God becomes Dot, you'll have to understand this play was written in 1953, just at after the Second World War. Now, after two world wars, the Holocaust, the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, life in itself had become so very uncertain that whatever we were seeking, all the meanings were seeming very absurd right at that time. Now, in such a backdrop, people were waiting for something. It was perhaps God, it was perhaps the resurgence of a new geopolitical power, because critics have suggested that perhaps America is the new Godot. Perhaps some have suggested that by Godot, Beckett means God, and then Beckett had to come and say, if by Godot I meant God, I would have said God and not Godot. So there has been a lot of speculation, and speculations still go on. But Martin Eslin, the person, the critique who actually named this genre, the theater of the absurd, Martin Eslin wrote a book by the same title, The Theater of the Absurd. The Theater of Absurd. Now, in that book, in the introduction in itself, Eslin talks about one prison where a play was to be enacted. Now, which play? Now, since it was an all male prison, they needed a play which was to be all male. And if you have focused on Waiting for Godot even a little, you have noticed that there are no women characters per se in the text. So it was a very safe bet. Now, people thought that this was a stupid idea because what would the inmates of a prison understand about theater of the absurd?
বলছি ম্যাডাম বলছে যে টাকা কি হচ্ছে না বলছে।
So, as I was saying, Godot. Now, people thought that what would these people understand of theater of the absurd, a play like Waiting for Godot? But 5-10 minutes into the play, these so-called convicts, they were severely interested in the play. You know why? Somebody said Godot is outside. Somebody said Godot is freedom. So I said, no, that do not ask what is it. Let us go and make our visit. So I always tell my students in the classroom, and I'm telling you as well, do not ask who Godot is. Godot is whoever you want Godot to be. If you are missing someone, he is Godot or she is Godot. If you love someone but cannot quite convey because of maybe physical barriers, social barriers, psychological barriers, then that person is Godot. If you are looking for financial stability, that financial stability in itself is Godot. If you are looking for what is the meaning of life, then the meaning of life is Godot. Whatever you want, you can think of it as Godot. And the beauty of the text is this is very early to say this, but let me say this nonetheless. The beauty of Godot is I remember one of my students 3-4 years ago. before the 2020, the pandemic. One of my students came to me and said, "Sir, why can't Pozzo be Godot?" And I said, because Pozzo isn't Godot." And she said, "No, sir. What if today's Pozzo is yesterday's Godot?" That made me think, yes, it might be. Because with time, our Godos keep on changing. If you are someone who is looking for a job today, Godo is job. When you get that job, perhaps you want to go to world tour. World tour becomes Godo. Then maybe you want to settle down. Then finding a partner becomes Godo. Then maybe you want to have a family. That becomes Godo. So Godos keep on changing. So that's also a possible interpretation according to me. Because I find it very interesting. And the text doesn't quite deny it. We shall talk about this later, okay, as we come to that section. Now, as I was saying, look, the character's endless waiting for Godot reflects us in a way the human tendency to seek a sort of meaning and purpose in a seemingly indifferent universe. And this highlights the absurdity of the human predicament. Now, you will see that when Pozzo and Lucky are appearing for the first time, in the backdrop, there is some noise, some sound of footsteps approaching. And Vladimir and Estragon are afraid. If they were actually waiting for Godot, they shouldn't have been afraid. They're worried. What happens if Godot comes? And they discussed amongst themselves that they will listen to what opportunity Godot is bringing, what he's bringing to the plate, and they will take it if they like it, or they will leave it if they don't like it. So, look, Godot, while will give them a sort of a sense, a sort of script to perform their lives, but simultaneously, Godot cannot force upon you your way of choosing life. So Godot can give you a better opportunity. Godot is perhaps that better opportunity which will come to you. But it is ultimately your decision whether you choose to take it or leave it. Now, look, in this way, by leaving the identity and intentions of Godot open to interpretation, Beckett invites the audience to grapple with the fundamental mysteries of existence in itself. And the search for a meaning, the search for some sustainable philosophical discourse becomes all the more, what should I say, problematic in the face of such an uncertainty. Now, look, uh, Beckett calls, in this context, the subtitle comes in. That is a tragicomedy in two acts. This further emphasizes the existential and absurdist elements of the play. Because by labeling Waiting for Godot as a tragicomedy, Beckett blurs the boundaries between comedy and tragedy. That is, the play holds a tonal ambiguity and existential depth simultaneously. Beckett, somewhere down the line, blurs the thin line between tragic humor and comic tears. And Since tragicomedy combines both the elements of tragedy and comedy, often juxtaposing the moments of humor and absurdity with moments of profound sadness and despair, it very interestingly becomes a very unique weapon in the hands of Samuel Beckett, because this is what he was aiming for in the long run. Beckett wanted such a thing to express the human predicament. Now, what I understood from my reading of Waiting for Godot is that there are, there is no absolute tragedy, nor is there any absolute comedy. You can be very, very happy outside and very sad inside, or you can be very happy inside and have moments of sadness. No person is absolutely happy, no person is absolutely sad. And similarly, there cannot be an absolute tragedy or an absolute comedy. Life is a mixture of both. Now, therefore, the use of tragicomedy reflects the dual nature of the characters' experiences. That is, their lives are marked by moments of absurdity, of light-hearted humor, and maybe a little bit of levity as well. Let's accept it. As well as there are moments of existential anguish and despair. So you will very easily find that dialogue about hats and boots go hand in hand with dialogue about life and death, with the philosophical ruminations and ponderings of the significance of life, the human predicament, the human condition, and so on and so forth. So this is a very poignant tool. The tragicomedy is a very poignant tool to in the hands of Beckett for him to express the human condition. And you see the characters struggle with memory. The first thing that they cannot do is quite muster up their memory. They cannot remember certain things from their past. And Beckett very interestingly intertwines memory with identity against the backdrop of mortality. And all of these things are juxtaposed very brilliantly with moments of dark humor, moments of absurdity, creating a sense of tonal complexity and existential irony. For example, when Vladimir and Estragon are sitting towards the beginning of the play, and Estragon's boots won't come off, and Vladimir has a problem in peeing, this problem of peeing, that is the problem regarding some perhaps some sexually transmitted disease or perhaps some physical ailment, is immediately linked with the human predicament. That is, one has a problem in urinating, the other has a problem in taking off boots. And Beckett keeps on quipping on the word, it hurts. So the idea is that the comic tears and the tragic laughter are so deeply entangled that it is very difficult to isolate the one from the other. And therefore, through the lens of tragicomedy, Beckett, in a sense, invites the audience to confront the contradictions and uncertainties of the human condition. And thus, Beckett very easily highlights the absurdity and the poignancy of existence in itself. Now, look, the play, both the acts, since they are so very symmetrical, uh, Vivian Mercier once very brilliantly said that Uh, the play, I'm exactly forgetting the exact quote. It was something like the play contains the absurdity in two acts or something like that. I'll check it and I'll let you know. But what happens is that the title and the subtitle of Waiting for Godot provide very important clues for understanding the play's central themes. It links the central themes of the play with the characters, tone, setting, and everything. And altogether, it evokes a sense of an anticipation and expectation while simultaneously conveying a sense of futility and meaninglessness. And therefore, what happens is that the tragicomedy, the usage of the tragicomedy, highlights the play's tonal ambiguity and existential depth simultaneously, inviting the audience to grapple with the absurdity of human condition. In such a situation, what happens is that the title, while it talks about waiting for Godot, it does not shed much light on Godot himself. But it does keep our focus on the fact of waiting. The fact of waiting remains a major concern throughout the play. But as we go on through the play, as we read the play, we see that apart from the fact of waiting, the act of waiting becomes very important. Because Vladimir and Estragon, they say that at least we are waiting. At least we are waiting for something to happen. Therefore, waiting in itself becomes a major action. It instead of being an action verb with no action in itself, waiting in itself over here becomes an action, quite like Lucky's thought performance. Like we think of thought as something which is very personal, which is sedentary, but Lucky presents his thoughts as an experiment, as an action. Similarly, here waiting becomes an action, and what they do while waiting, that also becomes very significant. That is, Beckett, via waiting, ties the, you see, waiting is relevant. Waiting is relative to time. And by bearing down the space on which Vladimir and Estragon are waiting for Godot, Beckett locates the void in the land with the void in their life and the void which they wish to fulfill by waiting for Godot, by meeting Mr. Godot. Beckett ties these three things together. So, therefore, he creates a three dimensional, so as to say, space where Vladimir and Estragon come together waiting for Godot. And we will see that Beckett very interestingly creates pairs of characters who are support systems for each other. And you'll see that Godot is the only character who does not have a pair. It is very interesting because, according to me, Godot also has a pair. Because since they are waiting for Godot, Godot is absent. But throughout the play, since they are waiting for Godot, Godot is also present in the, at least in the matrix of the play itself. Although he is physically absent, but he is conceptually present. So therefore, Godot present as a pair, Godot absent. So in this way, it becomes very interesting to locate Godot in the scope of the play. Now, since we were talking about character pairs, let's talk about character pairs. Now, when the play opens, we see that central to the play are the character pairs Vladimir, Estragon, Pozzo, Lucky. They navigate the desolate landscapes while grappling with the questions of identity, memory against the backdrop of mortality. And let's look at that. Let's look at this concept, this idea. So, first, let's look at Vladimir and Estragon. Now, Vladimir and Estragon are often referred to as Didi and Gogo, and they're central characters of Waiting for Godot. Now, why are Vladimir and Estragon called Didi and Gogo? Because you see, in French, the word di means pondering, thinking, and Gogo suggests action. They are more like Beckett's Laurel and Hardy. One is thin and tall, the other is fat and short. And what happens is that there was once a discussion that who would play Vladimir and Estragon, and a suggestion came up that Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton should play the roles. So you see, Beckett was creating a very interesting dynamics to portray Vladimir and Estragon. You see, they spend the entirety of the play, Vladimir and Estragon, waiting for the arrival of Mr. Guru, engaging in idle chatter, philosophical musings, and moments of existential despair. Sometimes they want to commit suicide, sometimes they want to do something with life, and so on and so forth. Now, Vladimir is the more intellectual one, as I said, the, and he's more contemplative of the two, while Estragon is more skeptical and resigned to their fate. And the dynamics between Vladimir and Estragon reflect the complexity of human relationships and the existential angst of the characters. Also, it would be very interesting to note over here that Vladimir has problems with his hat. Hat goes on head, contemplation. Estragon has more problems with his boots, go on the feet, action. So their banter and wordplay provide momentary levity amongst the growing existential gloom. And while their struggles with memory, identity against the backdrop of mortality resonate with the audience on a deeply human level, we see that through their interactions, Beckett highlights the absurdity and poignancy of human existence in itself. For example, they talk about salvation and damnation, along with a sense of love, a sense of friendliness, a sense of loss as well. But they are on the same plane. If Vladimir is here, Estragon is here on the same plane. But look at Lucky and Pozzo. Pozzo is the master on the top, Lucky is the servant. So, in a way, Beckett is creating a cross, the cross on which all of humanity belongs. And look at the names. Vladimir sounds Russian, Estragon sounds Italian. Sorry, Estragon sounds Spanish, Lucky sounds American, Pozzo sounds Italian. So, it is all of humanity taken together. And Hugh Kenner very beautifully said one thing. He said that the place, the setting, looks like any place. Hugh Kenner's exact quotation was that the place looks like nowhere, no when, and therefore represents all where, all when. So that becomes very important. That becomes very interesting. So against the backdrop of Vladimir and Estragon, we have Pozzo and Lucky. Pozzo is the master, Lucky is the servant. And they serve as foils to Vladimir and Estragon in a certain way. Pozzo is pompous and domineering, while Lucky is subservient and mute. And the relationship between Pozzo and Lucky is one of power dynamics, manipulation, and a lot of despair. And Pozzo's treatment of Lucky reflects the transient nature of power and the fragility of human existence. Because despite his apparent dominance, Pozzo is ultimately powerless in the face of his own uncertainties of life. Meanwhile, in the final act, Lucky's inability to speak symbolizes the breakdown of communication and the limitations of language in expressing the complexities of human experience. Now, language plays a major role. I will talk about that as well. Let me briefly give you one example. I will come to this point as well. How language breaks down. You see, Vladimir and Estragon want something to eat, and Pozzo is eating chicken. Estragon wants the bones. So he asks for the bones. And Pozzo instead gives them a performance of thinking out loud by Lucky. So Lucky's tirade becomes a performance. We had never heard about somebody yelling as a performance, and simultaneously, we had never thought that if I ask somebody for food, say I go to a restaurant and I ask for food and instead they give me a performance, I'll be very furious. I'll be absolutely furious. So, what happens is that communication keeps on breaking apart. Because you see, in a Derridian sense, if we look at it in a Derridian sense, the world of language is different from the world that we belong to. For example, if the person I call father and the person you call father are different people, but the name father or baba is the same. Okay, say uh, I call this pen and I also call this a pen, but they are two different types of pen, but they have the same name, right? So it does not mean that this pen is a lesser pen than this pen, right? The word pen is a marker, a sign by which all the pens in the world are called, right? But this pen, it's a fountain pen, and this is a dot pen, a ballpoint pen. So the way they write their basic features, I can refill this. Maybe this is a use and throw one. I don't remember. So their basic features are different, but both are called a pen. So in a way, what happens is that while they are different, in the world of language, they are the same. They are called by the same name. Like my father is different from your father, but they are both called fathers. So in a way, what happens is the differences in the linguistic world and the differences in the human world are different. It is a very problematic concept. When you will grow up, you will read about it in structuralism and post structuralism. It is very interesting, but simultaneously very different, very difficult. Not difficult if you get the hang of it, but initially it sounds very difficult. And I will not go much deeper into that because then I'll get sidetracked from waiting for Godot. But you see, language, communication in itself fails at certain times because language fails. Beyond the point, language fails. Let me give just one final example and I'll stop discussing this issue right now. Uh, Imagine a father who is holding, or imagine a mother who is holding her baby for the first time. Imagine the joy that the mother is feeling. Now, that joy cannot be expressed properly in any language. Similarly, a person who has maybe lost a friend, or a person maybe who has lost someone near and dear one, his or her sorrow, their sorrow cannot be expressed in language properly, no matter how articulate, how eloquent you are. So, therefore, you see, it becomes very difficult. Language often breaks, communication breaks down because of the inaccessibility of language. The linguistic world is different than the real world, the world that we put into. Now, I will not go into this any further because then I'll digress very much. Now, as I was saying, so I have talked about a little bit about Vladimir and Estragon. I have talked a little bit about Lucky and Pozzo. There are other pairs in the text as well. Like I have already talked about Godot present and Godot absent. The trees are also pairs because in the first act we have the tree which is barren. In the second act there are a few leaves. Again, the landscape mostly remains the same, and therefore it kind of reflects itself. The boy is also a pair because if you see, there is an uncertainty in the play whether it is the same boy or a different boy. Because in the play, one boy says that I tend to Mr. Goro's sheep, the other boy tells that I tend to Mr. Goro's goats. And the two boys are a pair because one gets beaten by Mr. Godot, the other is not beaten by Mr. Godot. And they come and they kind of ascertain that Mr. Godot does exist, but Mr. Godot is not going to come today. And in this way, it is pivotal to understand that on the shoulders of these boys, the existence of Mr. Godot is ascertained because Vladimir and Estragon, since they have a problem with memory, we cannot quite consider them to be very reliable narrators of who Mr. Godot is, what he is, etc. etc. But since a third person comes and says that okay, Mr. Godot exists, because Pozzo has never heard about Godot. So then again, and he's the landlord of this area, he's the landowner. So what happens is that we were doubting that whether any Mr. Godot exists or are these two tramps talking trash. But when the boy appears or when the two boys appear, we are at least certain that okay, a certain Mr. Godot exists. He does exist. It is a different fact that he's not coming today. And this is where waiting for Godot becomes very interesting because Vladimir and Estragon, at least they are on stage. They are there in presence and in performance. Pozzo and Lucky are there on the stage in presence and in performance. Godot's problem is that Godot is either present or performing. Godot is the person who makes the performance possible. So, in this way, he is present. But Godot is a person who does not perform until the very end of each act because it is he who sends the boys. So Godot is there in presence and in performance, and Godot is there in absence and in non-performance, if I may say it like that. So Godot creates a very interesting binary, and therefore I was saying that Godot also has a pair. So Godot creates this very interesting binary in the course of waiting for Godot. Now, what is the significance of these pairs? Look, character pairs in Waiting for Godot serve as microcosms of the human condition, highlighting the absurdity and poignancy of existence in itself. Through their interactions, Beckett explores themes of identity, memory, mortality, and you see, not only just in Waiting for Godot, but also in Endgame, we have Hammond Clove, and in other Beckett plays as well, we have many pairs. Now, why is this pairing so very important? Because look, against the vast unknown, against the vastness of the absurdity of the life, Beckett gives a human being a companion with whom he can interact, with whom he can at least make life a little easy. And Vladimir and Estragon's relationship reflects the human tendency to seek companionship and connection in a world that often feels isolating and indifferent. And in their struggle with memory, with identity, they resonate with the audiences on a deeply human level, highlighting the existential angst that pervades the play. Towards the beginning of the play, Estragon tells Vladimir, if I remember correctly, or maybe Vladimir tells Estragon, please check it. He tells the other, one tells the other, let's go a bit safely. So one tells the other that he has been beaten while he was sleeping beside a ditch. And he does not know who has beaten him. Okay. Right at this moment, the audience is also thinking, okay, bad things happen to me as well. And often they are not in my control. I don't know who is beating me in life. Maybe not physically beating, but you get my point. And we have concepts like fate, destiny, blah, 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 karma, and so on and so forth. But what happens is unknown forces do often beat us to the game. And when one of the characters of this duo speaks of this unknown character beating, what happens is automatically the audience is drawn towards them. And he takes the opportunity in a very beautiful manner. He goes towards the audience to the front stage and says, I see brilliant prospects here. So he's automatically breaking the fourth wall and including the audience. So Vladimir and Estragon reflect all of humanity waiting for something. Pozzo and Lucky reflect all the power dynamics that are there in society. Godot is the thing that we are searching. Whatever we are searching in life, what we have not received. The boys are perhaps the events that make certain things possible or deter certain things, deter certain things. And finally, the landscape is the psychological topography of human beings. It is the globe theater, whatever is happening inside. And look, this is a globe, na? Globe theater. The greatest theater of the world is being played over here. So it is the psychological topography, the barren psychological topography where we are alone. Maybe Vladimir is all the thoughts, all the ponderings that are there in us. And Estragon is all, symbolic of all the action that is there in us. And with all thought, all action, in the barren wasteland of our own mind, we are waiting for a certain Godot whom we do not know. When Godot appears, if Godot appears, we will listen to him. We will see what he has to say. And then we'll either take it or we'll either leave it. And events happen, boys come, and they tell us that Mr. Godot is perhaps not coming today, but certainly tomorrow. And while we are waiting, we are playing several power dynamics in our mind. And we are waiting for that tomorrow. Or as Shakespeare says, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow. A poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. 'Tis a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So we are also strutting and fretting upon the stage, with our own Vladimir Sestragons, with our own Pozos and Luckies, with the boys, with waiting for Godot. But ultimately, since Godot is not coming, at least on the first two occasions, Godot does not come. Earlier also he perhaps came, perhaps did not come. We do not know. We really do not know. So it becomes very difficult to grapple with the situation. And therefore you see, Pozzo and Lucky, their relationship serves as a stark reminder of the transient nature of power and the limitations of human agency. Because Pozzo's treatment of Lucky underscores the inequalities and injustices inherent in society. And while Lucky and his silence, they symbolize the breakdown of communication and the existential despair that permeates the play, they become very interesting markers. And I really hope we have the time to discuss why perhaps Pozzo is Godot but is not Godot. All right, let me quickly, just in two, three sentences, uh, talk about this. Because in the next class, I'll be talking about Godot and other issues. You see, in life, we are not searching for just one thing. We are very greedy people. Let's be very honest. We are all very greedy people. Roti, kapra, makan, etc., etc. We need 10,000 things in life. Say that brand new smartphone, that television set, that car, that house, uh, that this and that and that and this. We need 10,000 things in life, and we are not satisfied even then. We will need 10,000 more things after that. So, there is maybe, say, if I sit today with a list, if I sit with today and make a list after this class, then what do I want from life? Say 10 things, what do I want from life? I make a list. It will be very easy for me to bring it down to three. I bring it down to two, but bringing it down to one. Okay, if this one thing happens, I am very happy. I will never ask for anything again. Sorry, I am lying to myself. So you see, we need multiple Godos. Godo is not one. And therefore, Beckett at least gives us four Godos or eight Godos. Godot had come or did not come sometime earlier before the play began. Because Vladimir and Estragon know of Godot. So they have met Godot. So Godot exists. First appearance of Godot. In the first act, we hear about Godot. Vladimir and Estragon are already waiting for him. Okay, but he does not come. The boy comes and says that he will come the next day. Now we see that we jump, and the second act does not refer to the next day because suddenly the leaves do not come on the tree. So it is a few months later. So Godot, the third occasion, okay, in the second act. And finally, the boy comes and says, not today, but certainly tomorrow. So fourth occasion. So there are four occasions at least when we have a certain Mr. The mention of a certain Mr. Godot. Okay. Simultaneously look, perhaps on all of these four occasions, Vladimir and Estragon have met, are meeting, and will meet a Mr. Pozzo who is significantly very close in power and in position to a Mr. Godot. So you see, in a way, Beckett, so 4 plus 4, 8, and 8 is a very significant number. It looks like infinity inversed. No? The infinity sign, it looks like it. So two hemispheres, two spheres come together, two universes. One is perhaps the universe of Vladimir Estragon, the other is perhaps the universe of Lucky and Puzzo. Or perhaps in one universe Godot exists, in the other Godot does not exist. There are an infinite there are infinite interpretations. Okay. I'll not go into that. But what happens is that in a way, Puzzo teaches us that there are many gurus available around us, but we are waiting for perhaps one guru. So Pozzo is perhaps a guru, but not the guru we are seeking. Or as my student once pointed out, Pozzo is today's Pozzo is perhaps yesterday's guru. Like say, today you are all students, maybe you are looking for a job of say 20, 30,000 right now. If the job comes 10 years later, so as I was saying, sorry, phone calls keep coming and I can't help it. Kindly excuse me for that. I'm extremely sorry. The flow gets cut, I know, but extremely sorry for that. So, as I was saying, see, you were looking for a job of 20, 30,000 right now. 10 years from now, if you get a job of 20, 30,000, will that suffice? Obviously, no. So, today's Potso is perhaps yesterday's Guru. So, when we were children, 10 rupees meant a lot. But today, even if I get a 500, that's not enough. That's the beauty. Okay, we will stop here today. In the next class, we'll continue from here. All right, I don't know if I am making any sense or not, but if you have enjoyed it, let's try now. Read Waiting for Godot in this way. And about the introductory and all, I will upload that later when I have time. Okay, so good night and see you in the next class.